The morning sun painted the Texas horizon in hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the sprawling fields of Maplewood Ranch. For 50 years, this land had been a sanctuary for my family, where my late mother, Eleanor, had tended her herb garden with hands as gentle as the breeze. Her legacy lived in every blade of grass, every fragrant sprig of lavender. But on that fateful spring day in 2025, the peace of our ranch was shattered by the roar of an engine and the arrogance of power. I was sipping coffee on the porch, watching my grandfather, Henry Sullivan, now 72, kneel in the soil, his weathered hands nurturing the same garden my mother once loved. At 52, I'd spent my life on this land, learning its rhythms and secrets. The ranch wasn't just home, it was our identity, our defiance against a world that often forgot the value of roots. But as the black SUV tore up our gravel drive, kicking dust into the air like a challenge, I sensed trouble brewing. Out stepped Margaret Hensley, the iron-fisted president of the Pineview Estates Homeowners Association, her blonde hair immaculate despite the morning heat. Her husband, Carl, followed, a burly man stuffed into a police uniform that strained at the seams. His hand rested on his belt, a silent threat in his swagger. Margaret clutched a clipboard, her heels clicking on our porch steps with the precision of a drill sergeant. "James Carver," she declared, as if reading from a court summons. "Your property violates Pineview Estates community standards, specifically lawn maintenance and landscaping requirements." She thrust a paper at me, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of authority. I glanced at the document, then at our pristine ranch, which had stood proud long before Pineview Estates was even a blueprint. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this land isn't under your HOA's jurisdiction. We're a quarter-mile outside your boundaries." Margaret's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed. Behind her, Carl smirked, sizing up our land like a predator. "Actually," he said, hooking his thumbs in his belt, "recent boundary adjustments put you squarely in our oversight. And I don't like your tone." Henry, wiping dirt from his hands, joined us, his walking stick tapping a slow rhythm. His face was calm, but I saw the steel in his eyes. Before I could argue further, Carl strode back to the SUV. The engine roared, and what happened next seared itself into my memory. Carl drove onto our front lawn and began doing donuts, the SUV's tires ripping through grass and soil. The herb garden, me mother's pride, Henry's sanctuary, was churned into mud in under 2 minutes. Margaret stood with arms crossed, her smirk a badge of victory. "This is what resistance looks like," she called over the engine's growl. I felt rage boil in my chest, my hands clenching into fists. Henry's grip tightened on his stick, his jaw set like stone. When Carl finally stopped, brushing dirt from his uniform as if he'd done honest work, Margaret handed me a citation. $500 for noncompliance, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Pay within 30 days, or we escalate." As they drove away, leaving our lawn in ruins, I stood frozen, staring at the devastation. That night, under a moon that made the torn earth look like a wound, Henry joined me on the porch with 2 coffees and a manila folder. "Been thinking," he said, handing me the folder. Inside were deeds, survey maps, and letters from the 1970s proof that our ranch was beyond the HOA's reach. "Bullies only understand one language," he murmured, his eyes glinting. "But the best revenge teaches a lesson." I didn't know it then, but Henry was already plotting something that would turn Margaret's arrogance into her undoing. The next morning, a certified letter arrived, demanding $1,000 in escalated fees and threatening property seizure within 5 days. Margaret was tightening the noose, but Henry seemed unfazed, studying maps with a magnifying glass. "Been checking the pond," he said casually. "Water's deeper than usual this year." His words were cryptic, but I knew Henry never spoke without purpose. That afternoon, my friend Clara Bennett stopped by with cinnamon rolls and news. Clara, who ran the town's beloved bakery, had heard rumors. "Margaret's telling everyone you're troublemakers," she said, settling into a porch chair. "And there's a sign at your driveway pending resolution. It's meant to shame you." The sign was just the start. Margaret was planning a social media campaign to paint us as rebels, and her tactics were already isolating us. At a community meeting that evening, I presented our evidence, deeds, maps, letters, but Carl interrupted, his hand on his belt, implying I was a threat. Margaret played the victim, and by the end, neighbors I'd known for decades avoided my gaze. The weight of their judgment settled on me like a stone. Driving home, Henry pointed to the pond. "Time to call Tom Wheeler," he said. "He's got a tow truck business, and we might need some heavy equipment soon." His wink told me the fight was far from over. The next day brought new humiliation. 3. No parking HOA enforcement, signs blocking access to Clara's bakery. Margaret was punishing anyone who supported us. Clara, ever resilient, recorded a video exposing the HOA's tactics, and it spread online, drawing support from across Texas. But Margaret struck back. Carl arrived with a search warrant, claiming we stored hazardous chemicals. The search was a farce, but Carl left behind a USB drive in our workshop, a mistake that would change everything. The USB drive Carl left behind was a small thing, no bigger than a key, but it held the weight of a reckoning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over Maplewood Ranch, I sat in the workshop, the air heavy with the scent of oil and sawdust. Clara joined me, her eyes sharp with determination. We'd cracked the drive's password, Carl Sheriff 456. As predictable as his swagger, and what we found sent a chill down my spine. Emails. Dozens of them, between Margaret Hensley and a man named Victor Langley, a real estate developer with a reputation for turning small towns into sprawling suburbs. The messages laid out a scheme as cold as it was calculated. Margaret was using her HOA authority to harass landowners, forcing them to sell at rock-bottom prices to Langley's company. Our ranch, with its prime location, was the crown jewel in their plan to expand Pineview Estates into a luxury development worth millions. "This isn't just overreach," Clara said, scrolling through the emails, her voice tight with anger. "It's fraud. Conspiracy. They're stealing people's homes." The emails detailed payoffs, forged documents, and Carl's role in intimidating anyone who resisted. Margaret had targeted other properties too, but our refusal to bend made us their biggest obstacle. I rubbed my chin, a habit born from years of solving mechanical problems, and felt a fire kindling in my chest. This wasn't just about our ranch, Anna Maria. It was about every family Margaret had bullied, every neighbor she'd silenced. But we needed to be smart. "If we release this now," I said, "she'll claim it's fake. We need more." Clara nodded, already uploading the files to a secure cloud. "We'll build a case. Document everything. She's not the only one who can play dirty." That night, Henry was on the phone with Tom Wheeler, the gruff owner of Wheeler's Towing. Tom had his grudges against Margaret. Their HOA had slapped his business with parking violations for months. "She's been hounding me like I'm public enemy number one," Tom growled. "Count me in." Henry hung up, a rare grin spreading across his face. "Tom's bringing his rig tomorrow. Says he needs to test it by the pond." I raised an eyebrow. "The pond?" Henry tapped his nose, a gesture that meant he was 3 steps ahead. "Engineering's in our blood, James. Your mechanics, my farming, will handle these bullies." The next morning, our electricity was cut off, a safety violation Margaret had orchestrated through her connections at the power company. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a direct attack on Henry, who relied on an electric oxygen concentrator for his lung condition. Watching him struggle with heavy portable tanks, his pride refusing to let me help, turned my anger into something sharper, more focused. Margaret wasn't just after our land. She was endangering my grandfather's life. I spent the day in town, using the library's Wi-Fi to research HOA laws and property rights. The more I read, the clearer it became. We were legally in the right, but Margaret's power came from intimidation, not law. She operated in the gray areas, bending rules until they broke. At the courthouse, I noticed her meeting with city officials every Tuesday at 10:30. Always leaving with a manila folder she guarded like a secret. The pattern screamed corruption, but proving it would take time. Back at the ranch, Clara found a package on her bakery's doorstep, blurry photocopies of HOA minutes, financial records, and correspondence dating back years. They revealed Margaret's history of profiteering, skimming funds, and targeting properties for Langley. A handwritten note read, "Check audio frequencies on any recordings." Someone was helping us, but they were staying in the shadows. That evening, Margaret escalated her campaign. She released a recording on local radio and online, claiming it captured me threatening Carl at the HOA meeting. "I'm going to make you sorry." The voice, mine, or so it seemed, snarled. You have no idea what you're dealing with." The audio was convincing, but I'd never said those words, not like that. It was a fabrication spliced together from bits of my voice, likely scraped from meetings or our doorbell camera. The recording spread like wildfire. Neighbors who'd waved at me for years now crossed the street. Local shops grew cold, their owners eyeing me like I was a criminal. Clara, with her audio production background, analyzed the file. "Look at these waveform spikes," she said, pointing to her laptop screen. "It's edited. Different clips, different times, different places. It's good, but it's fake." The damage was done, though. Margaret had scheduled a final HOA meeting to use the recording as grounds for seizing our property. She was betting on public opinion to bury us. Sitting by the pond that night, the water still as glass, I felt the weight of defeat creeping in. The frog's soft splashes reminded me of my mother, her hands in the soil, her smile unbroken by hardship. If I gave up, Margaret's lies would become truth, teaching every kid in Pineview that silence was safer than fighting. I couldn't let that happen. I called Margaret, my voice heavy with feigned surrender. "You win," I said. "I can't fight the HOA, the police, and the whole town. Let's talk terms." She took the bait, agreeing to meet at the ranch the next day. What she didn't know was that I'd rigged the property with recording gear, a high-quality microphone hidden in the porch light, cameras tucked in the eaves. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. The meeting was set for Thursday afternoon. Margaret arrived with Carl, their SUV parked defiantly on our ruined lawn. She sat in a porch chair, uninvited, her briefcase brimming with confidence. "I'm glad you've come to your senses," she said, her tone dripping with triumph. "This could have been easier if you'd been reasonable." I let her talk, nudging her to reveal her plans. She grew bolder, outlining the development project that would transform our land into a goldmine for Langley. "Your little ranch is in the way of progress," she said, gesturing expansively. She even handed me a USB drive with compliance documents, oblivious to the trap closing around her. From the kitchen window, Henry watched, his signal to Tom clear. The tow truck's diesel rumble grew louder, and Margaret's smugness began to crack. The afternoon sun hung low over Maplewood Ranch, casting long shadows that stretched toward the pond like fingers of fate. Margaret Hensley sat on our porch, her voice brimming with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. Carl lounged beside her, his police uniform a silent reminder of the power they wielded. Their SUV, parked arrogantly on the scarred remains of our front lawn, gleamed in the Texas heat. But as Margaret droned on about zoning approvals and million-dollar deals, I caught Henry's nod from the kitchen window. The plan was in motion. Tom Wheeler's tow truck rumbled into view, its massive frame adorned with red, white, and blue ribbons, a patriotic flourish that made the scene feel almost theatrical. Henry had spent the morning placing signs around the pond. Film location, personnel only. They were a legal shield, making what was about to happen look like a planned production rather than the revenge it was. Margaret didn't notice the signs, too absorbed in her victory speech. Carl, however, stiffened as Tom attached a heavy tow cable to their SUV's rear axle. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Carl bellowed, leaping to his feet, his hand twitching toward his belt. His face reddened, the swagger of a small-town police chief crumbling under the weight of surprise. Henry stepped forward, his walking stick tapping the porch boards with deliberate calm. "This is private property, and that vehicle's illegally parked," he said, his voice steady as stone. "Texas law gives us the right to remove it. Oh, and I called the county sheriff's office this morning to report suspicious activity by local police outside their jurisdiction. Deputy Ramirez should be here soon." Margaret's eyes widened, her composure cracking like thin ice. "You can't do this," she shrieked, scrambling toward the SUV as Tom's truck began to pull. The vehicle lurched, its tires scraping across the grass, leaving fresh gouges in the earth it had already violated. The crowd of neighbors, drawn by the commotion, gathered at the edge of our property, their phones out, recording every second. Tom had rigged a Bluetooth speaker to his truck, and as the SUV slid toward the pond, "Sweet Home Alabama" blared, turning the moment into a spectacle. The vehicle bounced over uneven ground, branches scratching its pristine paint, dust clouding its windows. Margaret ran alongside, screaming about the destruction of property, but her voice was drowned out by the truck's roar and the crowd's cheers. When the SUV reached the pond's edge, time seemed to slow. The water, still and glassy, waited like a judge. Then, with a tremendous splash, the vehicle plunged in, waves rippling across the surface, startling ducks and sending frogs leaping. The SUV settled into the muddy bottom, its electronics sparking briefly before the pond claimed them. Margaret stood at the water's edge, her designer blouse splattered with mud, her perfect hair a sodden mess. Carl, wading in to salvage what he could, slipped and floundered, his uniform soaked and ridiculous. The crowd roared with laughter, their phones capturing every humiliating detail. But I wasn't done. I walked over to Margaret, holding a stack of printed emails from Carl's USB drive. "You dropped this," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like some interesting correspondence with Victor Langley about forcing us to sell through fake HOA violations." Her face went pale, the blood draining as she realized the depth of her exposure. The neighbors murmured, passing phones to share the emails I'd just handed out. The online petition Clara had started, demanding an investigation into HOA corruption, surged with new signatures as videos of the SUV's pond plunge went viral. Within hours, it had thousands of views, and news stations from Dallas were calling. Deputy Ramirez arrived, his cruiser pulling up just as Margaret threatened to have us arrested. He surveyed the scene, the submerged SUV, our property markers, the stack of incriminating emails, and shook his head. "Looks like a civil matter," he said, barely hiding a smirk. "Might want to call your insurance and see if they cover aquatic misadventures." But Margaret wasn't finished. Dripping and desperate, she pulled a document from her waterproof briefcase and waved it like a flag. "You think you've won?" she screamed. "This court order, signed by Judge Harmon yesterday, proves your property is under HOA jurisdiction. It overrides your dusty old deeds." The paper looked official, seals, signatures, the works, but something was off. The edges were too crisp, the language too theatrical. I asked to see it, and as I held it, the flaws jumped out. A misaligned seal, a signature that matched one from Margaret's old insurance claim, and a date stamp from a Saturday when Harmon's court was closed. "This is a forgery," I announced, my voice carrying to the crowd. "A good one, but fake." Margaret's eyes darted, her bravado collapsing. The neighbors pressed closer, sensing another twist. Our lawyer, Ed Thornton, arrived from Austin, his suit rumpled from the drive, but his mind sharp. He took one look at the document and scoffed. "Forging a court order is a felony in Texas," he said, snapping photos with his phone. "Using it to steal property? That's multiple felonies." He dialed the district attorney's office, reporting the fraud as Margaret stood frozen, her empire crumbling. The crowd's mood shifted from amusement to outrage as they grasped the extent of Margaret's deceit. I stepped forward, facing them. "I didn't fight just to keep this land," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling inside. "I fought because if we let bullies win, we teach our kids that silence is safer than standing up. I couldn't let that be Pineview's legacy." The words hung in the air, met with nods and murmurs of agreement. But as we savored the moment, I knew Margaret wouldn't go quietly. She was cornered, and cornered animals fight hardest. The air around Maplewood Ranch buzzed with the energy of a storm that had just broken. The pond, now home to Carl's submerged SUV, rippled under the late afternoon sun, its surface catching the light like a mirror reflecting justice. Margaret Hensley stood at the water's edge, her forged court order crumpled in her hand, her face a mask of fury and fear. The crowd of neighbors, once swayed by her charm, now whispered in anger, their phones still recording the unraveling of her schemes. But I knew this wasn't over. Margaret's desperation was a live wire, and she'd strike again if we didn't stay sharp. Ed Thornton, our lawyer, was already on the phone with the district attorney's office, his voice calm but firm as he outlined the felony charges Margaret faced. Forging a court order was bad enough, but using it to steal property was a legal death sentence in Texas. Carl, still dripping pond water, tried to rally, barking at Deputy Ramirez about jurisdictional violations, but Ramirez wasn't buying it. "You're out of your depth, Carl," he said, glancing at the SUV's roof barely visible above the water. Literally. The viral video of the pond dunking spread faster than a prairie fire, racking up tens of thousands of views within hours. Clara's online petition exploded, with signatures pouring in from across Texas and beyond. People shared stories of their own HOA nightmares, extortionate fines, baseless threats, lives upended by petty tyrants like Margaret. News outlets from Houston and Dallas called, eager for interviews about the Pineview Pond plunge, as it was now dubbed. Our ranch, once a quiet haven, was suddenly the epicenter of a movement. But Margaret wasn't done. That evening, as Henry and I sat on the porch sorting through the USB drive's emails, Clara burst through the gate, her face pale. "She's hired a lawyer," she said, holding up her phone. "Sent cease and desist letters to everyone sharing the petition, claiming defamation. She's saying the emails are fabricated and threatening to sue you, James, for stealing Carl's USB." I leaned back, rubbing my chin. Margaret's counterattack was predictable, but its ferocity showed how cornered she felt. Fabricating evidence, forging court orders, and now legal threats. She was throwing everything at us, hoping something would stick. "She's scared," I said. "Scared people make mistakes." Henry, rocking slowly in his chair, tapped his walking stick. "She's not just scared. She's desperate. Desperate folks don't think straight." He glanced at the pond, where Tom's tow truck still sat, a silent sentinel. "We've got the evidence, the law, and the town on our side. Time to finish this." The next morning brought a new blow. Margaret had convinced a local radio station to replay the fake recording of my threats against Carl, now with a fresh spin. She claimed I'd orchestrated the SUV dunking as an act of vengeance, painting me as a dangerous radical. The station ran a segment titled Pineview's Problem Property, and by noon, I felt the town's eyes on me again, some wary, others outright hostile. Even Clara's bakery took a hit, with a few regulars staying away, spooked by the smear campaign. Clara, undeterred, dove deeper into the audio analysis. Using her old college software, she isolated the recording's floss-plice points, inconsistent background noise, frequency shifts. "It's a hack job," she said, emailing her findings to Ed. "Good enough to fool most people, but not a court." Ed agreed, filing a motion to have the recording dismissed as evidence and requesting an investigation into its origins. He suspected Margaret had hired a professional to craft the fake, which could lead to more charges. Meanwhile, I kept digging into Victor Langley, the developer behind Margaret's scheme. A quick search tied his company to several questionable projects across Texas, land grabs, disguised as community improvements. I spotted him in town that afternoon, meeting Margaret outside the courthouse. Their conversation heated. Through binoculars, I saw him hand her a thick envelope, likely a payoff or more forged documents. I snapped a photo of his license plate, confirming his identity, and sent it to Ed. Every move they made was another nail in their coffin. Henry, meanwhile, was busy with Tom. They spent the day fine-tuning what they called the Pond Project's legacy. Tom's tow truck had become a local legend, and Henry wanted to keep the SUV in the pond as a permanent reminder. "Let it rust," he said, grinning. "Fish'll love it." He'd started giving impromptu tours to curious neighbors, recounting the dunking with a flair that grew more colorful each time. The herb garden, replanted with Clara's help, was already sprouting, a symbol of resilience. But Margaret's next move hit harder than I expected. The county assessor's office notified us that our property taxes had been reassessed, tripling overnight due to unreported improvements. It was a lie. Our ranch hadn't changed in decades, but the timing reeked of Margaret's influence. The new bill would drain our savings, forcing us to sell or face foreclosure. She was attacking our finances, betting we'd crack under pressure. I drove to the assessor's office, armed with our original property records, and found the reassessment order stamped with a familiar name, a clerk who attended Margaret's Tuesday courthouse meetings. The corruption ran deeper than I'd thought, a web of favors and payoffs. Ed filed an emergency injunction to freeze the reassessment, citing evidence of fraud, but the legal battle would take weeks we didn't have. That night, Clara and I pored over the anonymous packages documents, cross-referencing them with the USB emails. The HOA's financial records showed thousands in consulting fees paid to shell companies linked to Langley. Meeting minutes revealed Margaret rigging votes to expand the HOA's boundaries, a direct violation of state law. The handwritten note about audio frequencies led us to recheck our recordings, where we found a hidden track on Margaret's compliance, USB conversation between her and Langley discussing how to neutralize us. It was sloppy, unencrypted, and damning. As we built our case, the community began to rally. Neighbors who'd shunned us after the fake recording started coming forward, emboldened by the viral video and petition. A retired teacher shared how Margaret had fined her into bankruptcy over a fence dispute. A mechanic revealed Carl's threats to shut down his shop unless he sold to Langley. Their stories, combined with our evidence, painted a picture of systemic abuse. But Margaret's final gambit loomed. She announced a special HOA meeting to vote on seizing our ranch, using the forged court order and fake recording as justification. The meeting was set for the next evening, and she'd stacked the room with loyalists, banking on fear to sway the vote. I knew we had to act fast, not just to save our land, but to expose her before she could rewrite the narrative. Henry, ever the strategist, had one last card to play. "Tom's got an idea," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Something to make sure Margaret's meeting doesn't go as planned." He wouldn't elaborate, but the glint in his smile told me it would be unforgettable. The evening of Margaret Hensley's special HOA meeting hung heavy over Pineview, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of rain on the horizon. Maplewood Ranch stood quiet, its fields glowing under a fading sunset. But inside our home, the atmosphere crackled with purpose. The community center, where Margaret planned to seal our fate, was a mile away, and she'd stacked the deck, loyalists primed to vote for our property seizure, armed with her forged court order and the fake recording of my threats. But we had a plan, and Henry's cryptic smile told me it was about to unfold spectacularly. Clara and I spent the morning finalizing our evidence. The USB drives, emails, the anonymous packages, documents, and the hidden audio track from Margaret's compliance. USB painted an airtight case of fraud and conspiracy. Ed Thornton, our lawyer, had filed motions with the district attorney, but the legal system moved slowly, and Margaret's meeting was tonight. We needed to strike now, in front of the town, to ensure her downfall was public and undeniable. Henry, meanwhile, was with Tom Wheeler, plotting what he called the grand finale. Tom's tow truck, now a local icon, sat by the pond, its cables gleaming like a warrior's armor. Henry had been cryptic, saying only, "Margaret's about to learn what happens when you mess with 50 years of Texas grit." His tours of the pond, where Carl's SUV rusted as a fish habitat, had drawn crowds, turning our ranch into a symbol of resistance. The herb garden, replanted and thriving, bloomed as if defying Margaret's destruction. As we prepared for the meeting, Clara uncovered a new lead. The anonymous package's note about audio frequencies led her to analyze Margaret's fake recording again. Buried in the metadata was a digital signature linking it to a media firm in Dallas, one tied to Victor Langley's company. It was proof Margaret hadn't acted. Alanesh hired professionals to fabricate evidence, a felony that could land her in prison for years. Ed added it to the case, but we decided to hold it back until the meeting, where its reveal would hit hardest. By 6 p.m., the community center was packed, the room buzzing with tension. Margaret sat at the head table, her smile practiced but brittle, Carl beside her in a fresh uniform, his scowl daring anyone to challenge them. The crowd was a mix: her supporters, our allies, and neighbors caught in the middle, their faces tight with uncertainty. I carried a folder of evidence: emails, financial records, the forged court order, and Clara's audio analysis. But Henry, who'd stayed behind, had texted me, "Wait for my signal. You'll know it." Margaret opened the meeting with a performance worthy of a stage. "We're here to address a threat to our community's standards," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "James Carver's property has violated regulations, endangered safety, and now, as this recording proves, threatened our police chief." She played the fake audio, my voice snarling words I'd never said. The room shifted, some neighbors glaring at me, others looking confused. I stood, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "That recording is a lie," I said, holding up Clara's analysis. "It's been spliced together, edited by professionals to frame me. And this," I waved the forged court order, "is a fake, signed on a day Judge Harmon's court was closed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I passed out copies of the emails between Margaret and Langley, detailing their scheme to steal our land for profit. Carl leaped up, his hand on his belt. "You're out of line, Carver. This is defamation, and I'll have you arrested." But his bluster faltered as neighbors read the emails, their whispers growing louder. Margaret tried to regain control, claiming the documents were fabricated, but her voice cracked, betraying her panic. Then it happened. Henry's signal. The community center's windows rattled as a deep rumble echoed outside. Heads turned, and through the glass, we saw Tom's tow truck rolling down the street, towing a flatbed with a massive screen mounted on it. The screen lit up, playing a live feed from Maplewood Ranch. There, by the pond, Henry stood with a megaphone, his voice booming across Pineview. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Margaret Hensley thought she could bully us out of our home. But tonight, you'll see the truth." The feed cut to a montage. Carl's SUV doing donuts on our lawn, Margaret smirking as our garden was destroyed, and most damningly clips from our porch recording, where she bragged about her development deal and admitted to targeting us for Langley's profit. The crowd gasped, some standing to get a better view. Margaret's face went white, her clipboard clattering to the floor. Carl lunged for the door, but Deputy Ramirez, who'd slipped in quietly, blocked his path. "Stay put, Chief," Ramirez said. "This is a public meeting, and you're not going anywhere." The screen shifted to a final image, the pond, with Carl's SUV half submerged, fish darting around its rusted frame. Henry's voice rang out. "This is what happens when you disrespect 50 years of honest work. Pineview deserves better than corrupt bullies." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting at Margaret, demanding answers. I seized the moment, stepping to the center of the room. "This isn't just about our ranch," I said, my voice carrying over the chaos. "It's about every family Margaret's hurt, every neighbor she's silenced. We fought because if we let her win, we teach our kids that power trumps justice. That's not the Pineview I know." The meeting dissolved into uproar, Margaret's supporters slinking out, her loyalists drowned out by demands for accountability. Ed Thornton arrived, handing Ramirez a warrant for Margaret's arrest, based on the forged court order and audio evidence. Carl was detained for abuse of authority, his badge stripped pending investigation. As Margaret was led away in handcuffs, her eyes met mine, a mix of rage and defeat. The crowd parted, some filming, others clapping, as Pineview reclaimed its voice. The aftermath was swift and sweeping. The district attorney's investigation uncovered a web of corruption tying Margaret, Carl, and several local officials to Langley's company. Financial records showed thousands in illegal payments, forged inspections, and falsified notices. Margaret faced charges of fraud, conspiracy, and felony forgery, while Carl was indicted for abuse of power and intimidation. Langley's company collapsed under scrutiny, and his projects were halted. The viral Pineview Pond Plunge video hit 1 million views, making Margaret and Carl infamous. News outlets covered the story, and I gave interviews about property rights and standing up to bullies. Pineview's HOA was restructured, with new leaders focused on fairness, not profit. Families who'd lost homes to Margaret's schemes filed lawsuits, winning settlements that rebuilt their lives. Clara's Bakery became a hub of community pride, drawing crowds for her cinnamon rolls and the story of our fight. The pond turned into a tourist draw, with Henry's tours now complete with exaggerated tales delighting visitors. The SUV stayed, a rusted monument to justice, colonized by fish and plants. The herb garden flourished, a living testament to my mother's legacy and our resilience. Sitting on the porch one evening, the sunset reflecting off the pond, I thought about what we'd learned. Justice isn't guaranteed. It takes patience, proof, and a community willing to stand together. Henry, sipping coffee beside me, summed it up. Bullies only win if you let them. We didn't. Our story spread beyond Pineview, inspiring others to fight HOA abuses. I answered emails from strangers, offering advice. Document everything. Know your rights. Find allies. And never underestimate creative solutions like a grandfather with a pond and a friend with a tow truck. What do you think about the battle for Maplewood Ranch? Have you faced bullies or injustice in your own life, whether from an HOA, a workplace, or elsewhere? Did our story inspire you to stand up, or do you think our methods like the pond dunking went too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's debate. Where's the line between justice and vengeance? Your voice matters. Join the conversation.